This is my new OCD pedal. It is the version 2 from Full Tone. You can tell because the input and output is halfway right up there, and it says right here, built in the USA. This one comes with a buffer. So what's all this talk about true bypass? Hey, it's Dave. Welcome back to my channel. I just got my hair cut the other day. Man, it's looking short. So anyways, today I want to talk a little bit about pedals and true bypass. What does it mean? Why is everybody so up in arms about either saying it means a lot or it doesn't? So I thought I would get into it. First of all, let me say, if you have a guitar and you have active pickups, whether it's EMGs or whatever you're using, if you have active pickups or an active preamp, you do not need a buffer in your circuit, and you should be using true bypass pedals. The reason mainly is because, there's a lot of different reasons. Let me tell you a little bit about my story, and I'll try to keep it as technically uninvolved as I can. I do want to make it in the most simple terms. So years ago, I built a board, and I had a lot of pedals on it. And I took a 10-foot cord, and at the time I had two amplifiers. I had the Hot Rod Deluxe, I had just bought it, and I also had a Victoria Bassman. So I would plug in, and I was just testing out to see what everything was, how the board was sounding and everything else. So I would plug it in, and I'd plug it into the Hot Rod, and my goal was to try to see what would sound like when all the pedals were off, to make it so I could hear that it was transparent, because I had everything was true bypass, and both amps sounded great when I plugged it in. But then I would plug it in through the board, and I was like, "Ooh, that's dark. That's real dark." So I realized at that point that I needed a buffer, and what a buffer does is a buffer will take the signal and turn it into low impedance, and that'll make it so the cables have less the resistance is less affecting on the signal, as in a high impedance where the cable is resistance. So like if you have a 20-foot cable, your signal is going to be dark. If you have a 50-foot cable, now you're going to be really dark. And what a buffer does, it turns it to low impedance, so you can go down that cable and not have affected your tone. I mean, it's going to affect it slightly, even with a buffer, but not much. And so what ended up happening was I bought a buffer, and I did it again. And I'm like, it's close. It's so right there. What I felt was, and I wasn't even using, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I had like 6 pedals. And I felt like I was losing a little bit of brightness that I would get from just plugging in the 10-foot cable. But I also felt I was losing signal, and that I was losing like that a little bit of the presence. So what ends up happening is my neighbor used to come up and smoke cigars with me, and so Mike came up and we were talking, and before we started smoking, I was telling him my issue, and he goes, "Oh, I got a Cornish line driver downstairs. We should try that." I'm like, "All right." So he goes and gets it. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the sound. That pedal going first made my board sound like that cable and all the wires I was using invisible. I mean, it was fantastic. And I'm not about to spend $600 on a Cornish line driver. So I read the specs on it, and I thought of a couple of things I could do. And so the first thing I did was the next day is I bought a Full Tone Fat Boost 3. And with the Fat Boost 3, it's fantastic. It's what I've been using ever since. And my board's grown exponentially since then. And I really feel like it's great, So what ends up happening is when you use a buffer, now, some guys are going to sit there and tell you, well, my Boss pedal sounds awesome. It's great. Well, good for you. You're lucky. If you're using 1 or 2 pedals, one of those types of pedals is fine to use because you're going to need a buffer that goes through. The only thing I have to say about some of these cheaper pedals is the buffers stink. They drain a little bit of the sound, and you need something to drive it. So if you're using a pedal like the EP Booster, and I hear people say all the time, it's my always on pedal. Well, if it's always on, you don't need a buffer. That's your buffer. That becomes your buffer. It's converting the signal into low impedance. It's making doing all the magic that you need it to do. The other point I wanted to make is, if you are using a pedal that's always on, or you have a board where there's a pedal that's always on, or you always have something on, I mean, that really becomes your buffer. The only reason why I kept the buffer was just because it was working for me the way I liked it to sound. But the other thing is like I also, the pedals, I have the settings all memorized to having the low impedance go into it. And so that's going to be the other issue. It's like, so when is true bypass completely necessary? Well, in my opinion, a lot of fuzz pedals don't like low impedance coming into them. So you'd want to put them early on your board, and you also want to have the buffer after that, because they don't want to see any signal in front of it. They want to see your guitar signal. So it's important that any pedal before them would be then true bypass, because you want to give it that signal. There are some drives that don't like it as well. Not just fuzzes, but there are some drives. So like the Pinnacle by Wampler, in my opinion, does not sound good with coming in low impedance going into that pedal. The Angry Charlie, which you'll see on my board, is very early on my board. It comes before the buffer. That doesn't want to see a low impedance either. It wants to see high impedance from the guitar. That's what it wants. So in that respect, that's what kind of when I started thinking, well, let me get rid of my buffer, and I wish somebody would make a decent buffer. And when Mike Fuller said he was making a buffer and he had a great circuit for it, I was all ears, and so I went out and bought it. So that's going to go on my board. And so that's really the thing. The thing about true bypass is I do believe that they're important. I believe that they are the better. But you still need something, whether it's a pedal that you always have on, or something in the circuit that's going to act as a buffer. Now, the other thing is, so if you're going to use pedals like Boss and MXR, and you like the way those pedals sound, like that's your sound, and there's nothing wrong with them. When they're on, they sound great. To me, it's just when they're off, they're a little bit of tone suckers. But if you use an EP booster either before or after, and it's always on, and that's your sound, well then great, because then you're pushing that signal loss that you're getting, you're giving it back. But if you're just going to use, like, let's say you have like 8 pedals and they're all like just Boss pedals, to me you're going to have like such a sound loss that it becomes not good. In my opinion, like I just don't. It's like a tone sucker. Now, when I'm using all true bypass, I'm even hearing the tone sucking, even using a line driver, and I make it so it becomes equal to unity gain. So that's something I suggest to do. Is if you're going to work on your pedal board, whatever you do, go to your amp, check what unity gain sounds like with a short cable, like under 10 feet or less, and then compare it using all your cabling going into your amp. The other thing that I suggest is, because I push a lot of I tone stack quite a bit, so I plug into the lower of the two, not the I guess some people call them active inputs. On my amp it just says number 2, but it's lower. It's like a buffer. It's a lower. It can take in higher sound, higher, whatever the word I'm looking for is, you know what I mean. I'm not taking in like if you were to plug your guitar directly in, you would use the first input. I use the second input because I want this. I like my amp to be as clean as possible when I'm playing clean, so I don't want to push it. So the amp is lower there. So, anyways, like I said, I didn't want to be technical. I guess in this aspect, I'm not trying. It just happens out that way. So anyways, I'll let you know how this pedal is. Here it is again. I'm going to be putting it on the board this week. I also ordered the Jeff Coleman Bombastortion. So I'll let you know how that's going to go too. But I'm really curious to hear what Mike Fuller did with his buffer circuit, because it seemed very interesting. It was I think he said it was JFET, and therefore it's voltage driven. It just had me interested. Whether you use true bypass or buffered, it does not matter. Like I said, spend the time and work on your board so the sound is what you want it to be. And like I said, check it for unity gain against your amplifier when it uses a 10-foot cable or less, and you'll be able to see whether you like it or not. Because when I bought my Hot Rod Deluxe, I bought it because I bought a limited one. It has the Celestion. It was like the 2009, I think, called Bluesman. And you'd be like, listen to it. That's the sound you want. So when I play, as of right now, like my real clean sound, I'm still using an AC booster with the gain off. I use it as like a bright boost. And I realized that recently when I took the full tone off, that I was kind of using them both, and the full tone I can take off now. So the fat boost is coming off, and that's going to be the Jeff Coleman pedal. So I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't matter if it's a buffered pedal, if it's not a buffered pedal. There's ways to, if the buffer isn't working out because it's sucking in sound, you can use like a, I prefer it technically if you use the RC booster over the EP booster. I know the EP booster takes up a little real estate, but I cannot get that EP booster to not color sound. I had one. A couple of weeks I used it on my board. I put it in every position to try to get the sound that I wanted out of it. I could not. It colors the sound. There's no getting around it. And when I mentioned it to a buddy of mine, I'm like, yeah, it just colors the sound. He goes, yeah, that's the point of it. That's the sound you want. I'm like, yeah, it's not the sound I want. So I got rid of it. That being said, I think the RC booster, and I know John Harrington from Steely Dan in his live rig uses the RC booster to bring it to that unity gain. When he uses a lower output pickup, when he goes from humbuckers to single coils, he uses the RC booster to boost it up to the level of where how the humbuckers are reacting to the end. It's a good idea, and that's what I would recommend. For the most part, this is going to be the buffer pedal on my board, and when it's on, I don't need a buffer because it becomes the buffer itself. So anyways, that's all I had to say today. I didn't really play any music. I was going to play the Cars song, It's All I Can Do, but I couldn't find a guitarless version in the key of the record, so I'll definitely make one and try to do that soon. But I'll be back to play music for you probably tomorrow or Tuesday, so until then, very good.
You hit the nail right on the head with your comments, what you're saying today. You're right on target.
Right on the money, everything you said.